So I think I'm going to start off with some texturing here, and then maybe we'll move into creating the blade, which I'll show you how to do pretty easily, as well as making it flicker, and a nice way of making this just tracked in and out for animating. But if you, I'm going to use Obi-Wan's lightsaber because I kind of feel like whenever I'm doing lightsaber renders, I'm using the same lightsaber. So this is a little less common one. But there is a free model somewhere in my store, so that's already set up in Octane and stuff. So if you want to use that, it's like 3 pages deep. But there's tons of them around, so I wouldn't stress about finding one. I think I'm going to jump straight to 2K, a 2K square ratio to do this. And I'll maybe bump this up to 90 degrees, and I'll drop in a camera and kind of go straight in front of it like I usually do, because that is how I do things. So I'll center this down, and then I will kind of just lay things out before I hit render. So I'll drop in a background, make it black. I'm gonna immediately start working outside of my camera view. So to do that, I press F2 and then camera's perspective, and then when you render here, you can move around freely, but you will still see it with this camera in Octane. But just remember, that is the top view, so by default, so if you want to go back to the top, you can. Now I'm going to drop in a light, an area light, and I'm immediately going to target the lightsaber, and then I'm just going to kind of throw this out to the back a little bit like that, and then switch this to path tracing and hit render, and well, there's something. I'm gonna put in a fall of map here, make it 1000, 90 degrees, and I'm gonna kind of let HDRI do a lot of the lighting here, but I'm gonna kind of emphasize it with my own area lights rather than let the area lights doing the whole thing. So I'm going to keep the area lights kind of to the back of the lightsaber rather than having them doing anything up here. So just so you know, that is my intention going through this, and do 248 samples in there. We may as well do it here too. Switch that to 8, PGA clump to 10. You can see now we've got a nice little room light going there. I'm going to try and push that off of the kind of blue tone that it's in by default. Maybe keep it at 6000. And then I'm going to, holding control, just going to drag the light over, create a second one. I'm going to make this one a little bit wider so it wraps around the cylinder that is the lightsaber. And then I think I'm actually going to make this one 10,000 so it blows out this side a bit. Press W to get back on the object axis. Just kind of push that back. And then one thing I think is always good to do when you're messing with lights to begin with is to just add a little bit of bloom. Because, you know, if I turn that off and on there, you see your light it's always a bit tight to your object if you don't enable that. So you don't want to, of course, do that, but whatever floats your boat. I'm going to turn on the imager and then add a highlight compression, because that just kind of helps keeps the lights a little bit confined. And I've kind of got everything set up in the model here, quite basic. I haven't named that, whatever it is. Call them cubes. I definitely think it's appropriate to keep your model clean and stuff here, but there's no point in me showing you that. As it's pretty basic, you're going to want your lightsaber to look how you want it to look. But this, however, I can just see some little ripples there. So I'm going to try and get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to get in the camera. We'll make it 135 milliliter. No, it's too much. We'll go to 80. Nice portrait. I'll maybe stay about here in our angle, and then I'll put in that HDRI. So if you wrap up the top stuff here and call it scene, and we want our first light to be our key, and we want the second one to be our fill, and then I'm going to drop in a HDRI environment, put it underneath your sky, and make your environment tag on here visible. You can call this one BG, and you can call this one HDRI, and then I'm going to put in a studio HDRI. You can kind of use whatever one you want. So I've got this rim light studio HDRI, and I'm not really going to have it doing too much work in the way it lights up the scene. I'm just going to kind of keep it there for when we bring in reflections. So I'm going to keep it quite quiet for now. I may even change that if it doesn't give me the look I want. And I think I may bring this light further down so it's stronger towards the bottom. And I'm really not going to try and play with this too much, but I think I'll kind of get the information I want about the look when I start texturing. But I've already made a render of this already, so I kind of know where I'm swinging with it. So I won't be doing too much experimentation, but I think I will kind of keep the lighting segment there for now. I think that's simple enough for you to follow along. And now we can texture and kind of get a nice look there, because I think there's some interesting slight things we can do with surface imperfections here without making them over the top, but enough to make it look like someone's got their dirty fingerprints over it all the time. So let's go straight into that. So I think this is going to take up most of the tutorial, is going to be me texturing this. So I'll just drop in a metal material, as you can imagine, and call that base maybe. And then I think we'll start putting it on the parts you can imagine it would go on through. So it's on that bit, it's definitely on this like a emitter shield. And I think whatever lightsaber you're doing, you're going to be using one of the maybe 3 primary materials I'm about to use. So what are we going to do here to make this interesting? I didn't want it to just be a kind of perfect metal like I would if I was doing a product render. I wanted it to have some slight scuffs on it, to look a little bit worn down maybe. So I'm going to try and follow that kind of same pursuit again. Now you can just kind of put your roughness up a little bit, but I would switch your BRDF model to GGX to immediately get these kind of, you notice on my renders that I did, if you saw the one I put on my Instagram, there was these kind of like nice straight lines from it. Now you can get a HDRI to do that on the normal model or the others, but GGX is just going to kind of hand that to you on a nice little plate. So I'm going to kind of rock with that. I'm going to put it on these cubes too. I'm just going to put it on as many things as I know it's supposed to go on. Now, an interesting trick I'm going to show you with surface imperfection. Now, if you've seen my noise tutorial, you'll already know and be well aware of how to use noise as surface imperfections. I am going to use fingerprints this time. I have these smudges, and I can't quite remember where I got them from. They'll be in the project files on the store, available with all my renders and project files for this tutorial. But surface imperfections are easy enough to come by. You could get a Polygon subscription, you could get a Polygon trial and just get a few. You could do whatever you need to do. I wouldn't sweat about getting them. But either way, you could get, it's just a good result doing it procedurally with noise. Like I said, I have a tutorial on that about 4 or 5 tutorials ago. So what I'm going to do is plug this in the roughness, get our projections here, and I'm going to change this to box as you do, and maybe bring down the scale a little bit. See, that's ever so slightly a little bit big for what maybe a fingerprint would be. I'll stay around this. Now, I don't want it to look like this, do I? So I'm going to bring down our gamma quite a bit. I'm going to bring it up quite a bit. But here's where we're going to run into the issue here. Is now what Octane's doing is the part that isn't being affected by our surface imperfection is going to a level 0 on our roughness. So this bit is just kind of being ignored. Now we can create a new result here just by doing something with an add and a float, which is then going to make this slider work with our surface imperfection. So I hope that explains it quite simply as to what exactly we're doing here connecting this up. But the add is now the result between these two. And now we have this float, which is controlling the baseline level of roughness underneath our surface imperfection, which is what we want to do. Because I had this, say, at about 0.3 before. I think that's probably accurate, maybe even 0.25. Yeah. So if we do 0.25 here, and then plug this in to the roughness, we now get 0.25 on the roughness with the surface imperfection on top of it. There is a pretty nasty seam here on the texture. But you can rotate that on one of these axes to get rid of it. I'm not going to pay too much attention to that right now. But I still think this is a little bit rough. So of course a way around that is to just bring down the power of the surface imperfection. And then you're going to kind of see a more slight interpretation of that. So I'm going to rotate the lightsaber. So we're looking at the front of it. Although I do think it looks cool from the side. And now I'm going to kind of use that to leverage a good point where I want this HDRI. So I definitely want one of these kind of streaks down it. I could use it to light the rim like that, but I'm using my lights for that, so I'm not going to do that. But I think somewhere kind of halfway around like that. And then we're going to use our fill light first. Don't want to do that, I want to press F2. And get kind of an appropriate highlight. Because I want these kind of glowing spots, which I know is quite an interesting look, but I think the intention that I had going into it was to kind of have it to look like if you're playing Battlefield or something and you're customizing your gun the way that would look, you know, where it kind of floats up and you can like just kind of spin the gun around and stuff. I don't know if you can do that in Battlefield, maybe it's Call of Duty or something, but you know what I mean. So I'm kind of trying to get that look with the bloom hotspots and stuff. I think something like this is nice. And then I mentioned earlier about bringing this out of that cold temperature. I think doing that here on the fill light is a better option. And then on your key light, keeping it in the blue. In fact, you can even go to 7,000 here. And then I think that's a much nicer look for the lighting. I think sometimes you just have to lay out a basic approach and then bring your texturing forward to then bring your lighting forward with it and just kind of switch back and forth. I think it's pretty difficult to do one before the other. They kind of have to be a conjoined experience. So what we're going to do now is make a very similar material, but this kind of like black plastic. I really like the subtlety of this surface imperfection, where it is a very clean metal, but you're getting the nice, just kind of worn down look that you get after having a phone for a week, you know? It always just kind of has this kind of level of dirt to it. So I'm going to duplicate this material, and I'm going to start putting it on the bits I know it goes onto. So you might not have a lightsaber. You might not have a lightsaber that requires tons of this like black plastic. Some of them don't. I really wanted to go for one that did though. In fact, I was just about to go for one that is full of it. Like I think is it Revan? I think his lightsaber's like that. Or I don't think it is. One of them is anyway. Excuse my knowledge of that. So I'm gonna switch this to glossy, and I'm gonna come off GGX and loosen up them kind of reflections, and then I'm going to bring the power up on the surface imperfection. Maybe going to bring the scale down. Going to zoom in here. And just bringing down that flow a little bit helps show up some of that surface there. Another approach you could take is to change this to metallic, but in the IOR mode, go to IOR plus color, and that might just kind of push up your reflections a little bit more. But one thing I'm going to do back in the base material, just reminding myself, call this grip. In the base material, I'm going to change this from artistic to RGB IOR. And then if you come to refractive index, the website.info, and you change this to 3D metals, and I think titanium is a good look. Silverwing had that whole tutorial on wavelengths where you change this to 6.5 for your top value, and then 5.5, take refractive and the extinction coefficient, put in the middle one, and then 4.5 for the bottom one. So I would suggest following his tutorial to understand that. Really quite a great tutorial there. But I'm going to just nip this in quickly. And no, I don't use Microsoft Edge. I just have about 8,000 tabs open on Chrome. So we're not going to make your eyes suffer with that. And then when they're all copied in, your metal's just going to look that little bit more realistic. So yeah, again, check out his tutorial. It's really quite useful. I'm going to just fill in the textures a little bit more in some spots. And some of these rivets. And then there's a couple more spots we've got left. But what we're going to do now is the big red button. So you can duplicate your base, call it button. And if you ever need to get colors in your metals, just pop this back in artistic. And I think an easy way is to put an RGB spectrum in your specular. I'm going to push this not all the way to red because it's going to look weird, about halfway up. And I'm going to pop this on the button. And then you've got a pretty cool red looking metal there. So turn this back sideways. You can see that there. And then the last material we have is a brass material. I'll go materials. In fact, I think there's one more after. I'm going to delete this. Or you could just change that to kind of like a brass color, but I'm going to go back to RGB IOR. And this time I'm going to use, you guessed it, brass. So I'm just going to do the same thing here. And then with that, I'm going to apply that to the outside of this valve. And then I'm going to pop our black material on this belt clip. And then we've got one more material, which is this like crystal in here on the button. If you duplicate the red one, you call this crystal materials, node editor. I would savor this RGB spectrum, switch it to specular, common, fake shadows, index 1.52. And then I'm going to charge this spectrum into the transmission. And then you can put that on the button. And you will probably have the look you want. So it's a nice little kind of red glass look. And that's it for the texturing. That's a pretty nice looking lightsaber if you ask me. So what we'll do now from that is use some Xpresso to make the blade ignite using a slider as well as flicker procedurally as we animate. So let's have a look at doing that. So now we're going to look at creating the blade. So if we come to our F2 camera here, I can turn on, you can see I have made a blade in my previous render, but I'm pretty happy to delete that and kind of show you the best way to create that. So I think, as you can imagine, a capsule is the shape that I used. I'm going to pop that in here. And I think something around 7.5 centimeters was what I used. No, maybe not that thick. Maybe 7. Now, getting this scale right is a little bit difficult with these. I think, yeah, it definitely wasn't 7. I think it was somewhere around 5. 6. Yeah, 6 seems more like it. So I think maybe 350 on the height. And then maybe find a good spot like this. I don't know, lightsabers are tricky, but I feel like that is something similar to how they would look. But again, I guess it's personal preference. So in all your segments, I would probably put them all to 50 for safety, and we'll press F3 to come to our right camera. If you press C and make this editable, maybe drag it out the null for a second, and if we turn that off, we're just going to see this point here where it connects to the saber. If we come to our polygon mode, and we just pop in a cut there, grab our rectangle selection tool and drag over everything up to that cut and hit delete. Again, turn off the saber, press F2. Just going to right click, close polygon hole, and you could maybe do UL and then do MO, holding control, drag in. And there's your blade. And I think that is probably all you're going to want to do for it. Now, what we're going to do with this is we're going to create a emission texture, as you can imagine. But here's what we're going to do with that, is we're going to make it flicker. Now, usually doing these kind of effects can be a little bit difficult, but I feel like I have an interesting method of doing it in Octane. So we're going to make a diffuse texture, call this saber, or in fact blade. Now we've got this plugged in, we're going to go to RGB spectrum and we're going to plug that into the texture, and that's going to make that nice and bright, and we're going to push this to a relatively deep blue. And again, just like we did earlier on that red metal, we're not going to go too deep on the blue because we kind of want it to have a white hotspot around the center. And that's kind of the way that they look in the films, especially the newer ones, is for realism, they have this kind of hot blue in the middle. Well, sorry, they have this kind of hot blue on the outside while being quite rich in white in the middle. So I'm going to turn on surface brightness, and that's going to make that a little less bright. And I'm actually just going to kind of leave my power the way it is just now. Okay, so we're going to be using a little bit of Xpresso. And I get that can be a bit scary, but I wouldn't be afraid to take the leap. It's going to be very simple, and it's going to be nothing too difficult. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so what we're going to do is right click, programming tags, Xpresso. That's going to open up this window here. And what you're going to do is right click and add a Octane object tag. And then if you right click here, go to new node, Xpresso, general, and you're going to grab a noise. And then grab your Octane object tag and just drag it in here like that. And then grab your noise value here, bring it over to the blue input, and we're going to go to visibility and general visibility. And now you can see the noise is just turned off the blade. Now quickly, before I do any playbacks in the live viewer, I'm going to make this 1080p so it goes a bit quicker. And in the noise, you can see we get a bunch of operators here, so we can change stuff. I'm going to make sure it's positive only. And you kind of want to mess with these values till you get something that looks good. So 0.5, and if I make this 10 seconds and I play it back, you're going to see it's flickering now. And that's pretty much all you have to do for that. And that's just a nice kind of little cheeky way of getting flickers without having to do anything dodgy in post. And then, you know, you're getting cool kind of light reflections and stuff hitting off of other things in your scene, so it all around looks much better. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use Xpresso to create a slider that will retract and open the blade as we wish through keyframes, whatever we want to do with it. So let's move forward with that. So what you can do here is create a null. I'll leave Octane open. I'm going to bring this down here. And this is just going to be what we build the Xpresso on. I'm going to call this blade controller. And then if you come to user data, go to manage user data, and we go to add group, drag it out of there, call it blade controller, and then create data inside of that group and call it blade length. And then keep it on the data type on float, make the interface float slider, unit %, and then you've got 0 to 100%, and that's how our slider is going to look. And you're going to hit OK. And now we've got blade controller, got an extra tab here, blade controller with blade length. Okay, so what we're going to do is just add another Xpresso tag to that blade controller null, and just drag in that blade controller null, and then drag in the capsule, which we can rename to blade, and we'll right click, new node, Xpresso, calculate range mapper. That's all we're going to need, nothing too over the top. If we hit this output here, we should have blade controller blade length, which we made. We plug that into the range mapper, and then in the range mapper, you come to node, change the input range and the output range to %, like we did on the user data. And then on the output, drag that to the input of the blade. Go to basic coordinates, and then scale and scale Y. And now, if you come to your blade controller, you should, press F2, be able to scale that up and down, but we don't want it scaling from the middle. So if you come to your blade and turn on this axis tool over here and press F3, and you're just going to drag this down all the way to the bottom there, turn it off, align that. And now when we change the slider, the blade's going to pull up and down. And you can do some cool animations with this. You could have a dramatic scene of this slowly opening, but this is a much better way to get the blade to come on than to do a lot of other methods. So now let's make a cool little looping animation with this and see what we can do. Okay, so I think we can make some pretty cool loops with this right now. So let's take our blade controller and maybe around 1 second in, bring this to 0, hit control on the blade length, and only over a couple frames allow this to fully ignite, if you will. I think you want it to be quite quick, you don't really want it to be slow at all. And then if you just come to your function curves, grab them and make them linear, and you can see now we've got that turning on. Okay, and next we're just going to grab the entire saber and we're going to make this spin. So if we come to frame 0, come to frame 300 or wherever your last frame is, and spin that 720 degrees in whatever direction you want. We're just going to do basically what I did in the last tutorial. So if you come to your rotation H, grab both points and just invert them. That's literally what I did. And then we're going to have that fast kind of speed up, and then it slows down, and then it's going to speed up again. Now, I did mention in the last tutorial that in some occasions you're going to want to kind of add another controller in the middle. That might be something you want to do here. It may be what I choose to do, because I'm going to really try to get it to slow down here and then be quite sudden towards the end and the beginning. Awesome. And then I want this blade to ignite more on the faster side of its turn. So I'm going to grab these keyframes and bring it back a little bit. Even closer. More like that, yeah. And then towards the end, as it speeds up again, we're going to pop in another keyframe, holding control, go a couple frames ahead. I'm going to let the turning off animation be a little bit slower. You can kind of see it pull in there, whereas there's not even a frame here where you can see that kind of expand up. It's just off and then on, which is cool, but I also want to showcase the fact that it slides in, so that looks cool. And if we go to blade controller on the F curves, and just grab everything, make it linear. Watch that back, see how it looks. And you got a perfect looping lightsaber animation. So I think that looks pretty cool. The animation part was actually pretty quick, which is nice. I hope the Xpresso wasn't too daunting, but nevertheless, it's a very interesting and kind of pliable method if you're doing long-term animations. Yes, hypothetically, you could just go onto the Y and keyframe it, but I don't know, it's a bit more fun to have something like this to play with. It kind of makes it all a bit more interesting, and you know, you take a few more minutes at the beginning to get your result, and everything's just a bit cleaner and tidier. So, and well, you guys learn more too. So thanks for watching this tutorial. These project files will be on the store. I'm going to work on more of these animation tutorials as well, so be sure to check them out. And thanks for watching this one. I will see you very soon for another tutorial.